First of all, I take out my hearing aids because when I have them in, I speak too quietly. The result is I can't hear my wife without them and she can't hear me with them. So we never converse. Now, I'd like to thank the officers of the Theosophical Society in England for inviting me to give this lecture. It's a privilege, and I hope it's going to be a pleasure for all of us. It'd be a pleasure if we can get this thing to work. There we are. This year's Blavatsky Lecture comprises a preface, sections 1 to 7, 5 appendices and a bibliography, some 55 pages and 13,000 words in all. Preface, section 1, the evolutionary task of humanity. 2, the truly human centre. 3, the evolutionary task for the individual. 4, the energy field of the chakras. 5, energy sources. 6, the evolutionary task for groups, and a short conclusion. Plus 5 appendices, sources of inspiration, extracts from the secret doctrine, Assagioli's models, the classic threefold response, and in the presence of Ramana Maharshi. Details of what's in those will appear during the course. Then there's the bibliography and biographical details. You'll be delighted to know I don't intend to read the lecture to you. What I want to try to do is to give you the essence of the lecture and the main point that I want us all to take away and work with. So we shall start with the preface. The preface is very important, at least to me, because it explains to you where I'm coming from. There's a well-known scientist, Werner Heisenberg, who made a comment about mode of questioning. What he said was, what we study is not nature herself, but nature exposed to our mode of questioning. And for nature, read Theosophy. What we study is not Theosophy itself, but Theosophy exposed to our mode of questioning. So if you consider the implications of that, as I've said, for nature, read Theosophy. My mode of questioning is driven by the urge to reach a dynamic and purposeful concept of myself and of my role as a member of the human race. The urge to reach a concept which is inspiring, motivating, practical, and enabling for me. It may or may not have the same relevance to any one of you. If it does, that's fine. If it doesn't, keep on looking. Now, Theosophy is sometimes said to be a new presentation of the ageless wisdom. It's also sometimes thought of as a new presentation of the perennial philosophy. And Aldous Huxley, in his book of that name, made this very significant point. An important point to note about the perennial philosophy, or Theosophy, it's not so much a set of ideas to be thought about and debated. It's more an invitation to turn within and discover these truths for oneself. The consequent changes in awareness, in lifestyle, and in morality may be profound, but they come not through the acceptance of any conceptual system or doctrine. They come as a result of knowing the state of pure being. We had some glimpses of that from David Rolfe this morning, talking about the proem to the secret doctrine. So for me, the essence of Theosophy exposed through my mode of questioning, is neither a diversionary interest nor an academic study. The essence of theosophy is a transforming experience. And experience is difficult to communicate. All experience, language was invented to convey information, which it does moderately well as long as the speaker speaks clearly and the listener actually listens. But when it comes to communicating experience, language is woefully lacking. So this lecture is a lecture about aspects or facets of theosophy. It's trying to convey experience as well as information. I am addicted to poetry, particularly the Oxford Book of English Mystical Verse, which has been my Bible for about 60 years. But I have come to understand that poets communicate not with words, but through words. As David was saying this morning, you have to get through the outer facade and get to an understanding of what lies behind it. So I have a framework. My framework used to encourage my theosophical unfoldment is provided by 3 thoughts from Sri Ram in his book Thoughts for Aspirants. Sri Ram, coincidentally, was international president at the time that I joined the society. The first thought: the whole process of evolution for the spirit is an awakening. The second one must seek in the depths of one's consciousness the vitalizing center of one's being. He adds on to that the fundamental origin of all one's developments. And the third truth: will is not the focusing of diverse energies at a superficial point. Will is focusing yourself at your center. Now, we need to appreciate that theosophy is not owned by the Theosophical Society. In fact, there was a Quaker named John Woolman who in 1760, 100 years before the formation of the Theosophical Society, had this to say: there is a principle planted in the human mind which in different places and different ages has had different names. Confined to no one religion, nor excluded from any, it is a principle which is deep and inward, which is pure and proceeds from God. A principle where the heart stands in perfect sincerity. In whomsoever this principle takes root and grows, of whatsoever nation or religious conviction, they are brethren. To my way of thinking, that is an excellent presentation of what theosophy is all about. The other thing we need to note is that there are different ways to find and to use theosophy, the ageless wisdom. Some study the wisdom and represent its aspects through extension, interpretation, and analogy. For example, Edward Gardner. Others use their study and experience of the wisdom to devise a system for practical use. For example, Roberto Assagioli. Others discover in action some of its aspects, develop a system to use them, and then generate a theory arising from their practical results. For example, Barbara Brennan. Some have a wisdom experience and then seek to help others to have a similar experience. For example, Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. Others follow the tradition of a particular interesting typographical there, he tradition, it should be the tradition of a particular aspect of the wisdom, and then report their inspirational insights. For example, Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist monk. 5 examples, and all of them valid. The first 2 of those named examples were Theosophists. Gardner was a member of the English section of the Theosophical Society. Roberto Assagioli was a member of Alice Bailey's Arcane School. The other 3, so far as I know, were not or are not members of the Society. I've given brief notes about all of them in Appendix 1. For me, in my theosophical life, there have been windows. Windows that gave me glimpses of something of a different order. Windows that inspired new paths of exploration. Windows that set me off on new flights of speculation. The sources I've listed were among the providers of my windows, and I shall draw mainly on them, and particularly Edward Gardner, in the course of this lecture, the evolutionary task of humanity. And since this is a lecture about theosophy, exposed to my mode of questioning, all its statements should be deemed to be preceded by the words, perhaps, in one aspect, or from one point of view. It is as if. I shall present all my statements very dogmatically, as if I speak with the authority of wisdom. I don't. Beware. So, section 1 is the evolutionary task of humanity. Now, HPB, I didn't touch, I think, whoops. Electrical engineers always produce resonance. HPB is reported to have said, the evolutionary task of humanity is the spiritualization of matter. I say HPB is reported to have said that because since I first heard it in 1990, I've tried to find the actual verbatim source in her writings. I've consulted all the most experienced people in the study of HPB's writings, including Joy Mills. All of them agree that she said it. All of them point me to where in her writing she did say it. But when I look there, she didn't. So, for the purpose of this lecture, I'm going to assume that she did say the evolutionary task of humanity is the spiritualization of matter. Now, Barbara Brennan, in her book Hands of Light, also touches on spiritualization of matter, and interesting, she calls it the ultimate healing art. Now, from my good friend Edward Gardner, in his book The Play of Consciousness, he says, only gradually can the focused center of truly human life take charge, and the human spark of the divine flame become a conscious center of illumination as the dominant partner of the soul-body mechanism. More precisely, he says, under its direction can begin the fascinating task of training the personal bodies to be living and responsive instruments through which the 3 worlds of mind, emotion, and physical action may be controlled and mastered by the light of the divine life functioning consciously through a human center. So that, my friends, in more precise terms, is the evolutionary task of humanity. Under the direction of the focused centre of truly human life, to begin the fascinating task of training the personal bodies to be living and responsive instruments. And elsewhere in his writings, he's talking about the archetype, and he says, for any individual, the future is contained in that part of the collective human archetype allotted to them for expression and assimilation. And sometimes people have said to me, who allotted it? Now I can answer that question, and I do so in the written lecture, but I'm not going to go into that at the moment. You'll have to buy the lecture. There's things you won't know, things you won't hear of in the spoken version. I sometimes think to myself that although Gardner said that part of the collective human archetype allotted to us, I wonder whether it might be wiser to think of it as that part of the collective human archetype entrusted to us. It's entrusted to us for expression and assimilation. Without us, it's words. With us, it's a living, being, active presence. Yep, we can go on a slide. That's section 1 already. The truly human centre. I want to explore a little further that statement of Gardner's. Only gradually can the focus centre of truly human life take charge, and the human spark of the divine flame become a conscious centre of illumination. So first of all, looking at the truly human centre as an energy source. Now Gardner looks at the range of spontaneous emission of energy. The sun at one end of the scale, the amoeba, a single cell animalcule at the other. Both, he says, releasing energy from an inner, invisible source into the world of action, releasing it freely, generously, open-heartedly, abundantly. And then he says, we as human beings come somewhere between those two ends of the scale of spontaneous emission of energy. Why should we suppose that our nature is in principle any different from theirs? One vitally important point we need to realize: the essence of ourselves is not form. The essence of ourselves is life, energy. Then Gardner talks of a conscious centre of illumination. Now I can identify in the physical world light as operating in 3 different modes. Yes, that's good. Diffused or random light, for example daylight or an electric light bulb. Focused light, the beam of a car headlight or of a lighthouse. And coherent light, laser light. The first, according to Krishna Prem in the Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, is the light of Buddhi, radiant, benevolent. The second, according to Gardner, is the light of consciousness, to be focused by the lens of higher mind, to play on the screen of lower mind, bringing awareness wherever it touches. And my speculation is that the third, coherent light, is the light of the one Atman. So we'll come back to that in due course. Section 3 already. The evolutionary task for the individual. Gardner, in one of his, I've listed the source of all these things in the lecture itself. Gardner says that Just as our earlier root races, the first, the second, and the third, recapitulated the much earlier work of the first 3 rounds, so do the 5th, 6th, and 7th root races anticipate the work of future rounds. Hence the possibility today, during the 5th race period of the 4th round, for the zealous individual human being, you and me, to qualify for and pass the judgment test of the 5th round, the transfer of positive self-conscious to transfer positive self-consciousness from the lower self to the higher self, from personal to egoic control. There's the challenge for each one of us, to be a zealous human being. We can do it through the 3 stages of awakening, seeking, and focusing. Awakening to our own true nature, that focused centre of the truly human life. Seeking the vitalizing centre of our own being, the human spark of the divine flame. Focusing ourselves at our centre, so that it becomes a conscious centre of illumination and the dominant partner in the soul-body mechanism that is ourselves. Now, Barton talks of transferring self-consciousness from personal to egoic control. Now, the word he's using is ego, not to be confused with the psychologist term ego. So, ego is an alternative name for the higher self. The traditional 3-fold response to that challenge lies in meditation, study, and service. I seem to have missed that. I won't try and go back, we shall get confused. Meditation, study, and service. And in Appendix 4 of the lecture, I give some comments on that. In the course of my own experience, I've also found or developed useful ways of tuning the envelope of self. Creative visualizations which I find useful, not to supplant meditation, study and service, but to complement those 3. So what I want to do for a large part of the rest of the afternoon is to present the latest development of another creative visualization, the energy field of the chakras. But first of all, I need to talk a little bit about my concept of myself. That's a bit further on. No, it isn't. Gardner says the human life centre is unaware, unconscious, innocent, until its light strikes a responsive medium. Such a medium is provided by the material bodies of the lower mind, the emotional nature, and the physical nervous system. A group of interrelated forms which constitute the 3-fold abode of a human being. To represent this 3-fold abode of a human being, I use a part of the Saggioli model of man and the universe. It suits my purpose admirably. So in case you're unfamiliar with it, there is a Saggioli's basic model of man and the universe. Outside that dotted oval is the collective unconscious. Within it, the lower unconscious, the middle unconscious, the higher unconscious or superconscious, the field of consciousness, the circle in the centre, the conscious self or I in the middle of that circle, and the higher self, number 6 at the top. Now I skimmed through that because I am not concerned with that total model. In Appendix 3 of the lecture, I've given you references which will take you to that model in all its detail, and to two other models which Assagioli proposed, which again are very illuminating. Barbara Brennan, in her book Hands of Light, puts it much more simply. She says there's a universal energy field. Within that, there's again the dotted oval and the human energy field. And that's more like the model that I want to use. There's 2 points to be noted in Assagioli's diagram, or in this one for that matter. The first one is the symbol at the top of the oval, which Assagioli calls in his early books the higher self, and in later editions he refers to it as the transpersonal self. In that particular, that is an asterisk in ordinary type, blown up to a point size, where it appears not as an asterisk, but as a 5-pointed star. Just one of the quirks of windows and points. So, to me, in Assagioli's model, that looked like a star. And that's where my concept of the star of being came from. So that symbol at the top is the star of being, and the content within that dotted line of the oval, the human energy field, as Barbara Brennan calls it, I call the envelope of self. I'd better get on, because I think the envelope of self is my term, not Assagioli's. It's of vital significance. It's an envelope of matter which is partially segregated from the collective unconscious, or the universal energy field, and temporarily personalized, temporarily under our personal influence or control. Within that envelope, we ourselves, the ego, can gradually exert more and more influence. We can tune the matter contained within the envelope to respond to the light of the divine life functioning consciously through a truly human center. Instead of permitting it to follow its hitherto natural path of satisfying the urges and desires awakened by its experience in the personal self interacting with the world around, the collective unconscious or the human energy field. In thus tuning matter to respond to the life of the divine, we're awakening each particle of matter to its spiritual essence. We are spiritualizing matter. Using this concept of myself, the star of being and the envelope of self, a useful visualization which I keep promising I'm about to fulfill. And the energy field of the chakras came about for a reason which I'll explain. But it evolved further when I awakened to the fact that the quality of my doing depends upon the state of my being. The envelope of self is a good representation of the state of my being. Now, the origin of the energy field of the chakras was with Barbara Brennan. Well, that's my concept of myself. Barbara Brennan's book, Hands of Light, contains suggestions about the chakras being rooted in the spine, the central power current flowing up and down the spinal column, and disfiguring of the chakras associated with disease. She says, in fact, a torn chakra has appeared in every cancer patient I have ever seen. There's Barbara Brennan's picture of the chakras, the 7 major chakras. The front ones she labels feeling centers. The back ones, the back 4, she labels will centers. And the top 3 she labels mental centers. The important point for my purposes at the moment is that all of those chakras are rooted in the spinal column. That's Brennan's picture of disfigured chakras. As you can see, she conceives chakras as vortices. One vortex and several other vortices within it. And a vortex can stick out, or it can get uprooted, or it can be distorted, or it can be covered with a black sort of covering, which means it's not functioning properly. So that's her illustration of distorted chakras. There's Leadbeater's picture of the base chakra, which you can see, according to Leadbeater, consists of 4 petals. And there's his picture of the crown chakra. That's another picture of the crown chakra. So, the energy field of the chakras. The initial purpose was to imagine a means of restoring the chakras to their optimum condition. The second stage was consider the chakras all working together, and then there are further stages which consider the effect of the ray of the star. So we can leave the text for the time being. So the initial purpose was to find a means of restoring the chakras to their original pristine form. So that started off with that purpose, and it ended up with this sort of concept. The infinite peace of the star of being, embracing this personal self, brings it to resonance with the note of being, releasing the energy of the star, energy serene and pure, to flow down the central channel of being. The energy serene and pure, flowing down the central channel of being, flows through the root of every chakra, restoring the perfection of its conical form, refreshing and regenerating its beautiful iridescent colours, re-establishing and revitalizing the full symmetry of its energy pattern, so that every petal and every vortex of every chakra is vibrant, scintillating. Now, if you can imagine your energy field, your envelope of self, and all the chakras that feed energies into it are in that condition, that energy field would be a wonderful field of wholeness and healing. So that's where the first stage came to an end. And then, having got the chakras back as far as we can to their original perfection, what happens if all the chakras work together? All the chakras work together in beautiful, balanced, rhythmic integration to generate an energy field, generate in the personal self, in the envelope of self, an energy field aligned with, attuned to, at the service of the star of being. There's a wonderful energy field with which and in which the star can actually do its magical work. What then happens if the ray of the star shines into that energy field? I'm not sure. Eckhart Tolle, in his book The Power of Now, says, "You are here to enable the divine purpose of the universe to unfold." Gardner says the future for every individual lies in that part of the collective human archetype entrusted to them for expression and assimilation. So there is some deep hidden part of our own being and of the universe or the cosmos, which can be and is to be revealed and expressed through each individual. And then I wondered, what is the effect of the star of being when it shines into that energy field? Does it produce forms to enable the divine purpose of the universe to unfold? For a long time I thought it did. And then I wondered, does it produce forms? Or does it produce energies or frequencies? And I came across two very interesting examples which suggested that it might be frequencies. One was in a book by a woman called Val Hunt, who was a scientist, and she spent quite a lot of her life measuring the frequencies of emanations in the human aura. And she found that when she measured the emanations from the crown chakra of a trained and experienced meditator, she measured extraordinarily high frequencies. Then I came across a little book called In Days of Great Peace, and in that the disciple Muni Sadhu is sitting in the presence of Ramana Maharshi, his master, his guru, and he says, "In the silence, I could sense the subtle vibrations constantly emanating, radiating from the Master." So I thought, perhaps then, the ray of the star shining into the energy field of the chakras generates some new subtle vibrations. Then I remembered a poem it was a poem that appeared in the copy of the Theosophist, and it didn't actually have a title. But I decided that its title ought to be "The Universe in Me." And I recalled two lines from that poem which said, "A hidden singer sings in me the song of all eternity." Pity the personal self masks it, hides it, distorts it, obscures it. But there's the hidden singer singing in me the song of all eternity. And then, to my surprise, not to say amazement, in Thomas Merton's book, Seeds of Contemplation, he was a Trappist monk. He submitted all his life to the dogmas of Roman Catholicism. He wrote a book called Seeds of Contemplation, which has some beautiful, inspirational, insightful pictures of seeds of contemplation. And to my surprise, I found this: what is serious to men is often very trivial in the sight of God. What in God might appear to us as play is perhaps what he himself takes most seriously. At any rate, the Lord plays and diverts himself in the garden of his creation. And if we could let go of our own obsession with what we think is the meaning of it all, we might be able to hear his call and follow him in his mysterious cosmic dance. So, all those things coming together brought the final 5 or 6 lines. All the chakras work together in beautiful, balanced, rhythmic integration to generate in the envelope of self an energy field aligned with, attuned to, at the service of the star of being. Into the energy field of the chakras shines the ray of the star to illumine and to bless. setting that energy field, shimmering and dancing in the song of the universe. Weaving energy patterns appropriate to the needs of the moment. Awakening those subtle vibrations needed to enable the divine purpose of the universe to unfold. Bringing coherence to the field, the wisdom, the insight, the perspective necessary to enable a sequence of perfect action in the service of humanity. So there is my interpretation of what may be thought of as HPB's original suggestion, that the evolutionary task of humanity is the spiritualization of matter. Now, in section 5 of the lecture talks about energy sources. Gardner and Besant both indicate that any septenary system is divided into the 5 and the 2. The 5 being the planes for the evolution of consciousness, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, astral and physical. The 2 standing behind the 5 and providing energy to sustain their activity. So there, within ourselves, is that source of energy to sustain all our activities. And I wondered, how does that energy manifest? Well, I can't answer that question, but I can make 3 or 4 suggestions. The first one is a fictional one. Morris West, in his book The Clowns of God, and his character Jean-Marie Barrette visits his friend Carl, who's been very seriously wounded by a letter bomb. He said no words, he made no ritual gestures, he simply sat by the bed, clasping the hand of his friend between his own, so that it was as if they were one organism, the whole and the maimed, the blind and the seeing mind. He closed his eyes and opened his mind. A vessel ready for the inpouring of the Spirit, a channel by which it might infuse itself into the conjoined consciousness of his friend. When at last the inpouring came, it was simple and extraordinarily sweet, like a waft of perfume in a summer garden. There was light and a strange awareness of harmony, as though the music was not played, but written into the texture of the brain. There was a calm so powerful that he could feel the fevered pulse of the sick man subside like sea waves after a storm. And I've already quoted from Murray Sadhu in his book In Days of Great Peace, writing about the presence of Ramana Maharshi and the subtle vibrations emanating from him. And more of that narrative is given in Appendix 5 of the lecture. I find it interesting and very informative. A similar experience for me at a much more mundane level was Clara Codd, who was a member of the English section of the Theosophical Society. And when I'd heard Clara Codd lecture 3 times perhaps, I'd heard all she ever had to say about theosophy in formal presentations. I'd still travel a distance to be present when she gave a talk, because it was uplifting to be in her presence. I've told this story many times before, but a story that I call the creative atmosphere. There was a little boy who had a favourite aunt. She used to take him out for excursions, and he always enjoyed them. When he came home from one excursion, his mother said to him, "You love your Auntie Joan, don't you?" And he thought. And she said, well, do you like your Auntie Joan? And he thought again. And then he said, "Well, I don't know that I like her, but I like me better when I'm with her." And so that is creative atmosphere. And the ultimate for us is creative atmosphere. The star of our being, the one Atman, enlightening, illuminating every activity, so that every action is coherent, compassionate, constructive. That's where we're going. We need to get moving. I just want to say briefly something about the evolutionary task for groups. I suggest it is to form a nucleus. That's part of the first object of the Theosophical Society, and I think it's very pertinent. 3 aspects of it. Peter Russell, in his book, The Awakening Earth, suggests that a nucleus of enlightened people he regards as people who have themselves had the unitive experience. A nucleus of enlightened people is the necessary prerequisite for the implementation of permanent change for the better in the world. Edward Gardner on the formation of a nucleus. Successfully to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood is to focus and distribute a quality of spiritual life that makes for goodwill, tolerance, and fraternity. A spiritual flow of great potency. In my own sixpennyworth, we need to remember correctly the fundamental law of periodicity. The 2 parts of the cycle are expansion, and not contraction, but attraction. Expansion outward from a center or a nucleus, and then attraction back to that center or nucleus. And it's vitally important, in my view, to remember the attraction back. So, conclusion. My purpose in presenting this lecture is not to persuade you to agree with the fruits of my exploration, but to encourage you to explore for yourself. It's essentially a matter of living it, experiencing the fruits of your understanding of the ageless wisdom, bringing about transformation in your world by releasing your own potential. As I said in the preface to the lecture, for me there have been windows. My wish is that something in this lecture may open for you a window of opportunity. It would be untypical or atypical if I went through a whole lecture without quoting any mystical verse. So I'm going to end with 3 poems, short ones you'll be pleased to know, which sum up the whole business of the evolutionary half of the cycle of involution and evolution. From Alexander Pope in his essay on man, which sets out very well the state of affairs for the individual at the end of the involutionary half of the cycle and the start of the evolutionary half. Know then thyself. Presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man. Perched on this isthmus of a middle state, a being darkly wise and rudely great, with too much knowledge for the skeptic side, and too much weakness for the stoic's pride, he hangs between. In doubt to act or rest, in doubt to deem himself a god or beast, in doubt his mind or body to prefer, born but to die, reasoning but to err, sole judge of truth, in endless error hurled, the glory, jest, and riddle of the world. And then a poem called La Vie Profonde. Its author is a guy called Edmund Gore Alexander Holmes. It indicates for us the awakening process. Hemmed in by petty thoughts and petty things, intent on toys and trifles all my years, pleased by life's chords, pained by its pricks and stings, swayed by ignoble hopes, ignoble fears, threading life's tangled maze without life's clue, busy with means, yet heedless of their ends, lost to all sense of what is real and true, blind to the goal to which all. And then a poem called La Vie Profonde. Its author is a guy called Edmund Gore Alexander Holmes. It indicates for us the awakening process. Hemmed in by petty thoughts and petty things, intent on toys and trifles all my years, pleased by life's chords, pained by its pricks and stings, swayed by ignoble hopes, ignoble fears, threading life's tangled maze without life's clue, busy with means, yet heedless of their ends, lost to all sense of what is real and true, blind to the goal to which all. And then a poem called La Vie Profonde. Its author is a guy called Edmund Gore Alexander Holmes. It indicates for us the awakening process. Hemmed in by petty thoughts and petty things, intent on toys and trifles all my years, pleased by life's chords, pained by its pricks and stings, swayed by ignoble hopes, ignoble fears, threading life's tangled maze without life's clue, busy with means, yet heedless of their ends, lost to all sense of what is real and true, blind to the goal to which all. And then a poem called La Vie Profonde. Its author is a guy called Edmund Gore Alexander Holmes. It indicates for us the awakening process. Hemmed in by petty thoughts and petty things, intent on toys and trifles all my years, pleased by life's chords, pained by its pricks and stings, swayed by ignoble hopes, ignoble fears, threading life's tangle.